Hello, everybody. My name's Dutch. I'm an addict. And the first thing I want to do, I want to, from here, I want to make amends to the convention because Friday I was driving down here and I was in Jersey at 107. I'll never forget it. And I'm talking to Layman and, we're just shooting the shit. And you know how he can talk. So I'm just driving, 60 miles an hour, taking my good old time because I figure I got a 10-hour nut coming down here to North Carolina. And I told him, I said something about checking in at the hotel because I wouldn't get there between 9 and 10. And he says, what do you mean? I says, well, I don't have to be there till tomorrow. And he says, you're the opening speaker. I went from 60 to 80 automatically. And I said, I can get this. I can, I hadn't even picked Barry up yet. And I said, but we can do this. You know how we are stupid? So I told him, I said, look, you need to get somebody else. I can't do it. And the guilt, boom, just got me, because I've been blessed. I've been able to speak all over the world. And I never messed up a speaking thing till now. And I just want to apologize to the committee and Layman, you. And Layman's right. After I talked to him the first time, I said, I got a good feel from this guy. I said, I'm glad I said yes. And then I come to find out that he finishes concrete too. Because that's what I do. I work with concrete. When I got clean, I was unemployable. And the only person that would hire me when I came out of prison was this old concrete guy. And I hated it. And I didn't have any self-esteem to look for anything better. So I stayed doing concrete work. And I hated it probably my first 10 years doing it. And this is before any spiritual transformation happened. But where I'm at today, I love what I do. I think I'm one of the blessed people because I have a job that I do that I still get to play in the mud. I'm like a little kid and, I can get as dirty as I want and I'm still like a little kid, but I just wanted to get that straight with the committee because let me tell you something. This committee didn't go out of their way to do anything except straight service. And I was checking it out because, at a small convention, they're kind of intimate. You get to talk to people. You get to see people. It's not a blur. You get to see people, in action. And I got to tell you, this committee did a great job. And I've been to a lot of conventions, but and I guess it's part of the Southern hospitality. I live up in the Northeast corridor where everybody's angry. And, coming down here, it's like refreshing and just nice. I mean, you people are just great. So me and Barry already registered for next year. And that's because of you people. I mean, just, we come down here, you love us up and we feel it and we like it. So we'll be back and see what other nuts we can bring with us. But, my story is this. I was an addict before I ever picked up, and I can just go, through the inventory process that we go through, I realized that I couldn't identify feelings before I ever picked anything up. I was an emotional cripple before I ever used. And I started getting high in 1959. And the reason that I used to wet the bed. And what happened, the kids in school found out about it. So I stopped going to school. I couldn't handle the teasing. I couldn't handle feeling like there was no hope because this is where I had a hard time with God. I used to get on my hands and knees and beg God not to let me wet the bed. And I would wake up every morning and I would wet the bed. So I knew that there wasn't a God. And I felt different. I felt like I wasn't like everybody else. And as much prayer that I did, and my parents had a hard time with it. And so I stopped going to school and I started getting high. We used to have a movie theater. You could go to the afternoon movies for a nickel and watch cartoons all day. And that's where I was. And that's where the truant officer would find me, and that's how it started. And then when I was 13, I started going to jail, the juvenile home. And when I was 13, I would wet the bed in a juvenile home. Now, that's one place you don't want to wet the bed. You don't want to give anybody anything to mess with you with. And that's how it was. So I felt like I was less than, I was different. I wasn't as good as everybody else. And, I just used. I mean, from as far back as I can remember, all I did was use and go to jail. Use, go to jail. And going to jail saved my life. And I used to think that, well, I know I am institutionalized still. I'm clean 39 years, but I'm institutionalized. 10 years ago, I did 10 days in the county. That's right, 25 years clean. I did 10 days. I felt bad when I left. I know that sounds fucked up, but I did. I felt bad. I had to leave my pinochle partner, my spades partner. I wasn't watching Jerry Springer twice a day. I wasn't trading soup for Jell-O because I can do time. I mean, I'm the type of person, you give me a conjugal visit once a week, I'm good to go. I could spend the rest of my life away because I knew how to fit in. I could do the time. And that was always my attitude, like, fuck it, send me away. What are they going to do? And that's what it was. And every time that I got picked up and I got arrested, it was for the getting and using and finding ways it means to get more. Or somebody told on me. And that was it. And it just kept getting, the dues kept getting higher. The consequences kept getting higher. When I became, 18, I stopped going to the juvenile home and I started going to the county jail. And then when I was 20, I went to a maximum security prison. I got picked up. This is what happened. I was in Delaware, and that's below the Mason-Dixon line. And there was 2 white guys and 2 black guys in the car. And we was at a bank, and we had just robbed somebody. But we were at the bank. The next thing I knew, I had all these detectives kicking me, beating me. I took the worst ass whooping I ever had in my life. And it was because it was 2 white boys and 2 black boys down in Delaware. And they said I was trying to rob Delaware Bank and Trust because they found a gun in the car. I wasn't trying to rob a bank. I wanted to be a successful white businessman. So I put my money in the bank and they had messed up my interest. So I went there to tell them about it. What I did wrong was we had a gun in the car. The car was filled with drugs. And the thing that pissed me off the most was I had a white leather from Mexico and they took it. And I never got it back. So this was May of 1970. And I had gone from being president of my class to maximum security prison. And it was like, this ain't the juvenile home and this ain't the county jail. This is fucked up. And I couldn't get out. So what happened, I was in an OBS for 15 days. That's observation. And then I went to my preliminary hearing and the judge said I'm going to do every day of 55 years. Because they got me for interstate transportation, intrastate transportation, conspiracy, carrying concealed deadly weapon, attempted bank robbery, all this stuff. And it was like, well, I'm 20. That's 75. And he wanted to make an example out of me. So what happened, I go back to the prison and, I'm there a while. And somebody tells me that somebody's there to post my bail. Now, my bail was a lot of money. And it was a guy that I knew. He was with a motorcycle club, and he wanted to post my bail. And I said, are you crazy? I'll never be able to pay you back. And this still gives me chills today. He says, you'll do it for somebody else someday. I wasn't into sharing nothing. I wasn't doing shit for nobody. It was all about me. But this is what happened, and I got I got let out, and the next thing I knew, I was one of the first ones on a methadone clinic, And so what happened, there was this guy that came to me at this methadone clinic, and he says, do you want to go to they're going to experiment at this tuberculosis hospital with drug addicts. And they're going to open a wing up. And would you like to be one of the people to go there? I said, nah, I'm not. I don't really care about going, because we were on 160 milligrams. And if you know what methadone is, you just put your head down on the table and that's it. There was no hustling in the street anymore. There was not, you was good to go. No, I'm fine. And then he said, well, there's girls there. That changed things. So I said, all right, I'll go. So he says, all right, well, what do I got to do? He says, be ready tomorrow. So I went to the clinic in the morning, and he picked me up. And instead of driving me into this place, he dropped me off out on the road. And I thought that was like, aren't you going to take me in and like make sure I'm okay? He drops me off and he says, I'm going to tell you one thing. All you got to do is be honest. Now I'm walking from the street up this long ass driveway to this hospital. Honest. Everything I did was illegal. Everything I used was illegal. I don't know how to be honest. And then I'm almost up into the hospital, and I said, I'm not going to be able to do this thing. If I got to be honest, I mean, I didn't know what the truth was. And I was still emotionally crippled. I couldn't identify any feelings. But I went into this hospital, and I guess I looked pretty pathetic, because one of the nurses came up and gave me a hug and kissed me on the cheek, and I could feel like I was getting ready to cry. I was getting, like welled up with emotions, because, I hadn't been around kindness, and I couldn't remember. And I stayed at this hospital, and I was a model patient. I guess I was a patient then. But what happened, a guy came from we used to have to go to these meetings, these 12-step meetings. And, back then we were, I guess you would call it leftover hippies. But they would come in and they would talk to us, and I never identified with anybody. None of the people that ever came to talk to us lived the way that I did. I mean, I would wake up in the morning and I wouldn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I was going to get something. And I wasn't the type of person that woke up, went to work, went to a bar, went home to my spouse. And I never heard any of these people say that they stole a TV for a drink. So a couple of months later, this guy came from California, and he had this little white book, and it said Narcotics Anonymous. And I can remember getting a little bit of hope. And when you have no hope, a little bit is like an ocean. And it was like Narcotics Anonymous. And I said, whew, what do you do with this? And he didn't know either, because there was no meetings. There was no meetings on the East Coast. And what had happened was his father was a doctor in San Francisco, and he got the book from him. Even though he was an addict, he didn't really know it at the time. And I procured the book from him. It's a nice word. It was a nice word. So what happened was they wouldn't let us have meetings, and we didn't know how to have meetings. You got to understand this. This is before rehabs, before any detoxes, before any literature, before we knew the statement, the therapeutic value of one addict helping another is without parallel. So all we had was a couple of people that were crazy that said, what are we going to do when we get out of here? And we started a meeting, and we didn't know how to have a meeting. We didn't do the readings because nobody told us to do the readings. There was 6 of us there. And then I was coming up on a year. I had 362 days, and I didn't want to be clean anymore because I was 21 years old, and I thought there was one more good time out there. And the disease was screaming at me, because if I had gotten a year, then I was going to have to help everybody. And, you got to understand this. I was an old timer when I had 2 weeks. They said, I can remember people saying, well, look, Dutch, he's got 2 weeks. You can do it. Like, so what happened was I went out. I wanted to get laid, and I wanted to get high. Because, when you're 21 years old and you figure out you want to live, you want to fuck. I mean, look, let's get right to it. Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat stuff. You know, what you see is what you get. But what happened was I couldn't just go right back and have them think that I was still clean. And I thought I could before I went and used. I thought I could just go right back and nobody would know. And it took 4 months for me to get back there. And I can remember this as clear as yesterday. I was kicking another habit, and all I had was a little bit of pot and a half a can of warm beer. That's all that was left in this place that I was at. And then, you know, my skin started to get like a plucked chicken, you know how you get. And I said, I got to do something. And I went to my parents' house. And then when they came to get me, I didn't want to go. I hid in the closet. And they came and got me out of the closet, you know, real cool, tough dope fiend. You know, they find me hiding in the closet like a bitch, you know what I mean? So they take me back to this place. And I went back there, and I knew that I had experienced that if you use, there's no guarantee you can get back. And back in 1971 and 72, when people didn't go to that meeting, this is what we did. We called the police stations to see if anybody got busted. We called the hospitals to see if anybody OD'd, and we read the obituary columns. And that's usually where one of those three places where the people was. So I went to this place, and we just had the 40-year anniversary of this meeting. And the guy that was there, that was one of the original 6 people that started it, he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah, why? What's up?" You know, like, I thought he was going to, like, be mad at me for something. You know how we are when people say, I want to talk to you. You know, they want to get their shit off on you, you know what I mean? But what happened, he said, I got to tell you something. He says, and I don't want you to take this in any other way except, I don't know how to say it, but this. He said, when I met you, I fell in love. I said, what? And he said, I knew you were going to take it that way. He says, but this is what I mean. He says, I was looking for somebody like you that had your energy, that had your drive, and was crazy enough to do anything to make it work. And that was like the best compliment I had ever gotten. I mean, I was like, I had no comeback, and I got comebacks for everything. And it was nice because this guy, and now it makes sense how it all transpired. When I was back at the hospital, he was out. He used to come and pick me up and made sure that I went to that meeting. And now 39 years later, I know why. So in the beginning, when I got clean, you know, and this is how NA grew on the East Coast. We started a lot of meetings out of resentment. If we didn't like the way you was running shit, we'd start another one. And we would try to build a better mousetrap. And back then, it wasn't about money, because most people was unemployable. If you didn't have enough money, you were told to take whatever was in the basket out. You know, it wasn't about sending money to some place where you don't know what's going to happen to it. We took care of our own. So there was no talk of steps. There was no talk of sponsorship. We worked steps as a group. Like, whoever was at that meeting, if it was a first step meeting, the whole group did it. We didn't know that you do it with a sponsor. Nobody told us. And there was no communication between the East Coast and the West Coast. You know, and we knew that there was a few meetings out on the West Coast, but we didn't know anybody. We didn't know how to get a phone number. And then when we finally did connect with them, they didn't believe that we had addicts on the East Coast. You know, and this started the East Coast, West Coast thing. And it went on for about 20 years because a lot of people thought that the mecca of recovery was in Southern California. And I can tell you this, it was alive and well on the East Coast, and it still is today. So what had happened was we sent somebody, we had a fundraiser, and we sent somebody out to California to get all this information. And 4 months later, we got a postcard from them Thanks for the ticket. I'm out in LA, living with a girlfriend, playing basketball, and I'm not coming back. you know, and that was our fact finding mission. You know, and this is how crazy it is. We had picked this guy because he was responsible. When he got to Southern California, it was like, East Coast who? So, when I said that we worked the steps as a group, that's what we did. And the biggest meeting was when a female was going to do a fifth step. And that's how it was. People would come, oh, I'm going to that meeting. And that's how it was, because nobody knew. You got to understand this. We thought we were doing right, but it was like the Wild West. There was no rules. And then, NA started to grow, and we had meetings every night of the week. There was no excuse for somebody to say, well, I'm going to this other fellowship because they got time. I'm going to this fellowship because they're stable. And then I went out to the World Service Conference in 1980 because I wanted to see if they was running an NA the way I thought they should. Because I was up and down the East Coast from Florida up to New England, and we were starting regions, and we were doing this and we were doing that, and it felt good, and there was a lot of people, but there was still no real structure that people could sink their teeth into. So I met this guy when I was out there. Now understand this, I didn't have a sponsor for 8 years. And I'll tell you why, because the same people was going to the same meetings, and I got sick of them. So I became a traveling addict. And this is before I even knew that if you broaden your base, you heighten your freedom. I didn't know nothing. Look, I was just raw energy. I didn't know nothing about nothing, and I just kept moving. But I met this guy, and they said he had experienced the steps. And I said, ooh, that sounds nice. I'd like to experience the steps. But to me, the steps were for older people with gray hair. It wasn't for me. I was in my 20s, and I was a young gun and still crazy, still going to jail clean. So I didn't ask him if he would sponsor me, because my ego at this time now was big. See, I was a big fish in a little pond on the East Coast. And I asked him, I said, could you handle me? Because if he had said no, I could tell people, well, I didn't ask him to sponsor me. But he said, yeah. And he says, but you're going to work. And I had no idea what that was. And he said, I want you to write, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, Dutch, how do you work step 1? That's what I want you to write. So I did it. And next time I went out to California, I gave it to him, and he said, do it again. I said, what? Because I wrote what I thought he wanted to hear. And then I wrote what sounded good. And did you ever go to a meeting and hear somebody drop something and couldn't wait to go to another meeting so you could drop it and make people think you thought of it? Well, I'm just saying that's where I was. It was all ego. It wasn't about doing the right thing. It was all about me. And I didn't know it. So he said, do it again. And now I felt like I'm getting judged. I felt like I was in school and this teacher said I was failing, and that I wasn't doing what I should. So I got a dictionary and I broke the step down. And I started writing. Now, meanwhile, I'm coming back from California, and everybody said Dutch was in a mental hospital. Dutch lost his mind because he's got people writing steps. Well, I was sponsoring about 30 guys at the time, and everybody left me except for one. And he was crazier than I was. Because nobody knew about working with a sponsor and working the steps and writing. And this is where I started to understand that if you're really on this road, the road gets narrower. And if you're living this thing, there's a loneliness that comes with it. And I'm talking about clean. And I've spoken all over the world, had standing ovations all over. And I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm telling you this because when you go home, there's nobody there to hug you and tell you what a great job you did. That's the reality of being a circuit speaker, let's say. And I've been blessed to speak all over, but I only speak a few times a year now because I feel like a recycled tire. So I pick my shots. Do you know what I mean? But the thing is that this last time that I did it, I realized that there was a difference between recovery and abstinence. And I had looked at them as the same. As long as you're not using, you're clean. No, There's a difference, and it says it in our readings. There's a difference between abstinence and recovery. Well, I said, if I haven't used for 10 years, well, what the fuck am I? I'm not using. Going here, going there, trying to help this, help that, do whatever I can. I bleed NA. And he said, well, recovery's about change. And it was easier for me to stop shooting dope than it is to change. And I had no clue how to change. And I was scared of change because I'm the type of person, I want to know what's it's going to be like before I change. I want to know what's in it for me. So I started the whole process with the steps. And at this point in time, I was elected to the Board of Trustees in California. I had my own business that was really successful. And I was getting divorced from, like when you meet the first love of your life, you think you're going to walk off into the sunset and live happily ever after. Well, that was shattered. That was all done. And I was a mess. And so I got the dictionary and I started writing. And it was, we admitted that me and my sponsor, were powerless over our addiction. Addiction is anything outside of myself that I use to make me feel good. And that our lives had become unmanageable. My life always was unmanageable because the reason that it became unmanageable because I always tried to manipulate people, places, things, and events to please me. And I never internalized that. And so after I got into working the steps, I lost my house, I lost my business, I lost my wife. My kids was cool with me, but, I was like their buddy, you know what I mean? It was not, that part really didn't get hurt. I mean, I know that they got hurt because divorce hurts children, but I have a very good thing with my kids today. And so then after that and realized that my manipulations clean was causing me problems. And, I had a lot of time. I had more time than anybody, a lot of other people. And it was, when you have some time, you kind of get caught up with the person with the most clean time is right. Well, that's not always true. And even people with time, they need to check themselves before they wreck themselves because it happens. There's a lot of people that are going out with over 20 years now. And I'll get to that as to, what happens. But what happened is then I went on, I feel like I had done step one right. And then step one's the only one you really got to work perfect. So then in step two, came to believe that a power could restore me to sanity. I thought insanity was just using drugs. I didn't know that insanity came in the form of having to get the last word in, especially in a relationship. When you're hooked up with somebody and you're a guy, you start raising your voice and get into that dumbass intimidation shit because you really need to be right more than you need to be president. And there is no compromise, when you got an ego. It's all about you. And you got to suffer through the changes because you're a victim of your own creation and you don't know it. And that's what happened to me. And I was like, man. And it was like crawling. The growth was slow. And, now I look back and all the times that I felt I needed to be right is like, I really didn't, but I didn't have the wisdom to know the difference. And then in step 3, we made a decision. Now, up until this step, whenever God came up, it was like, is it God's will for me to have long hair? Is it God's will for me to have these shoes? Is it God's will for me to have this car? Is it God's will for me to be with this girl? Is it God's will for me to get laid? This is how I used to think. I know you think like that too. Don't tell me you don't, because addicts sexualize everything, and if you don't, maybe you need to look at it. But everybody, all of my sponsees do. And they say that it's like this for most of us. So I don't mean to offend anybody. I'm just telling you my story. And so in making this decision, it had nothing to do with anything that you can see. Now, this is where the first 2 steps get you ready for the process. And in step 3, it's God as we understood him. It's italicized in the steps. Does anybody know why? I'm going to tell you why. because that bothered me for a long. Why do they got it italicized? Why is it different? It's got to be some reason. Well, my journey, I had some blessings. I was the liaison to the AA World Board of Trustees because I lived on the East Coast, and the AA Board of Trustees had their meetings in New York. And I used to go up to the Roosevelt Hotel to their meetings, and I was able to meet, Bill W.'s wife. I used to hang out with her up there. I was like her pet because I was a kid. But I got to understand some things that were written. And what happens is, we made a decision to turn our life and will over to the care of God as we understood him. And this is the beginning of the journey. And the decision that I needed to make was to simply continue with these steps. If you're an addict, that's the decision. It doesn't have anything to do with anything you can see. Understand this. There's two worlds. One's visible and one's invisible, and the invisible rules the visible. And this is where I started to get recovery. It was at step 3. The first 2 steps got me ready for it. Step 3 put me in it. And so what happens is, the last paragraph of the 5th tradition says that any addict can stop using and find a new way to live. And this was new to me. This is what they were talking about. I thought a new way to live was not going to jail anymore, that I was going to live in a nice house. I was going to have a bathroom that worked all the time. I wouldn't have to be waiting for the mailman to bring my welfare check, because that was my goal when I got clean, was to get on welfare. That was my goal. I had no other dreams other than to get the waffle. That was it. And I mean that. If I could get cigarettes and a roof over my head, I was okay. And none of the other stuff really mattered because my life was simple. I had nothing. When I got clean, my possessions was a beach chair and a box. And the beach chair was because I would put my lounge chair out on the street and put my box down and turn it upside down. And I had a lamp that didn't work, but I made it look like it was my spot. You know how, you got your own spot, and I stayed in these houses that were abandonments, but they was mine. And this is before any shooting galleries or before any crack houses. This is like my spot. So I had this lamp that didn't work, and I had an old broken beach chair that I got out of, and that was my possessions. And I was proud of them. And I had this cloth, this little black cloth that I put on top to make it look, and I felt, my mother would be proud of me if she saw me put this thing on. That's fucking crazy. That's what I was. Let's get back to the steps, So what happened is, in making this decision to turn my life and will over to care of God, was to continue with this process. And that's all the decision I needed to make. Under any and all conditions. It doesn't matter what, you continue in this process. If you want to live the Narcotics Anonymous way, you bet your life on these steps and you go for it. And so what happened then in step 4, I did my inventory. I did it 3 times. The first time I did it, I took a newcomer to the racetrack. And we won the first 3 races, and we was sitting up eating steak like king shit. You know what I mean? We got this. We're going to win them all. And then I looked at him and I says, man, I feel bad. He's a newcomer. I got 4 months. I shouldn't have done this. So I go into the men's room, I get 4 paper towels, and I start writing everything that bothered me with the racetrack pencil at the track. And then I go to this retreat, and I'm not even Catholic, but I went to this retreat, and I told this priest everything on this piece of paper, and he gave me something that was called absolution. I didn't know what the fuck he was talking about, but I felt like, I'm cool now. I did my 5th step. That's how whacked it was back then. You got to understand this. Back in the early days when you got nobody taking you to school, that's how it was. And then I did my 5th step, and it was 44 pages, and I used to go back and forth from California when I was on the board or going out to visit my sponsor. I was going to service stuff that was out there, and I spent 6 months writing my 4th step. And then it was time to do step 5. And I said, this is going to be a piece of cake because I love my sponsor now. I love this man. I respect this man. And by me respecting this man, I learned to respect NA and other people, and I started to respect myself, and it started with sponsorship. That's why it's the heartbeat. You don't get nothing till you're able to get something. Well, thought this step 5 was going to be a piece of cake. Admit to God, to ourselves, and another human being. It was easy, to admit to God. It was easy to admit to my sponsor because he loved me no matter what, unconditionally. I was telling him shit. I had a worse 5th step clean than I did using, almost. And he just loved me no matter what, unconditionally. And this is what he said. He says, all right, now go into the bathroom and read it into the mirror. And this is the part of the step that admit to yourself. When I came out of that bathroom, the tears was coming off of my chin. And nothing broke me. He didn't break me. The steps didn't break me. This process was telling me, we don't want you to live like this. And nobody pushed that pen but me. And when I was reading this to me in the mirror, it hurt that I had done this, that I had become this. Clean. I'm talking, 12 years clean. I got a decade behind me. Shit, I shouldn't be living like this. I'm still going to jail. Right after he said, look, step 5 is only 1/12 of the program. And he says, we're going to get right into step 6. And he says, I want you to write on 65 defects. And I want you to write what your life is like with it and what your life could be like without it. Really? You think I got 65 defects? He goes, oh, yeah. He says, I was going to say 100, but, let's go with 65. And he told me 65 because that's what he did. He didn't tell me anything other than what he did. He wrote on 65 defects. And so I wrote them, and I thought a lot of them meant the same, but they really don't once you dig. And I saw what my life was like with 12 years clean in these defects and what my life could be like, if they weren't in my life. And I didn't want them in my life. But what happens is when you become a victim of your own creation, you're powerless over acting out. You get a reprieve from your defects one day. You don't get a lifetime. I know how many people have said, oh, I did step 6. Really? All right. So we'll see you again. You'll visit this again because it's for one day you get the reprieve. And then we go on to step 7. And I used to say to people, why? What's the difference between step 6 and step 7? And everybody would say, oh, it means the same. Why would they waste 2 steps meaning the same thing? I don't buy it. So I remember I was at the East Coast Convention out in Kent State, and I spent the whole weekend in the library looking for what the difference was. And to me, just to put it in something that you can see, because as many people that's in this room, as many people that's in NA, that's how many different ways there is to work the steps. There's not one way. But for me, I needed to see it. And step 6 is like a car with 4 flat tires, and step 7 is trying to drive it. And that's as simple as I can say what it's like. And you have to have the defects removed. And whoever wrote these steps knew that I was full of shit and that I was a liar, clean, and that I was going to think, my self-deception was going to have me think that I had gotten rid of these defects of character. But when the pain comes back from acting out again, then you're ready to humbly ask God. Now you got the foxhole prayers going on. Now it's like, I'll do anything. Just take this motherfucking pain away. I don't care what I got. You into breaking deals and everything. And what happens is you start to feel the freedom. And it's like, I'm getting there. I can see I'm not the same as I used to be. And then we get into step 8 and you make the list of all the people that, you had hurt. And, there was 3 people on the list that I told my sponsor, I can't make amends to them because if I do, they'll kill me. And he said, and he was just some laid back Southern California guy. He says, well, if your recovery depended on it, would you? I said, ooh, they got me. Whoever wrote these steps knew that by the time I get to step 8, I've already established a relationship with a sponsor. I've admitted that I'm powerless over the disease of addiction. I'm powerless over what I substitute. Because don't get this fucked up. If you think that you're just powerless over drugs, you need to dig a little deeper. Because what we do is substitute. And you need to start working the steps with powerless over sex, powerless over porn, powerless over gambling, powerless over shopping, powerless over eating, powerless over traveling, powerless over holding service positions because you need a title. Anything when we feel less than that we use is something that you can see. Let's go back to the invisible rules the visible. The invisible world rules the visible world. The program is a set of principles, spiritual principles. Anybody ever seen a spiritual principle? They're invisible. So the program of narcotics is invisible. Narcotics Anonymous is invisible. Well, what does that mean? Look, I'm from the corner. I was afraid to move anywhere because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to cop. Addicts are addicted to certainty. I knew I was going to get something if I stayed here. I don't know what. But if I go to New York, I don't know what I'll get. I might get taken off. Fuck that. I ain't going there. I want the sure thing. So this process, let's go back to the last paragraph of the fifth tradition. Any addict can stop using and find a new way to live. Well, I felt stuck at step 8 because I was afraid to make these amends. And I didn't have enough faith that I would be okay. But like my sponsor said, if your recovery depended on it, I had a relationship with a sponsor. I'd admitted that I'm powerless over my addiction. I had hope because I believed that I didn't have to keep acting out. I had made the decision to continue with the process. I did the inventory. I admitted to God, to me and myself and another human being. I had worked through step 6. I had written out 65 defects of what my life could be like with and what it could be like without. And then in step 7, I realized that I only get a daily reprieve and that I am still not above using people, places, things, and events. Because when I came to step 3, this is where Dutch was. Dutch only knew how to use people and love things. And I can remember all the times I'm in love. I'm in love. She's it. That's it. I didn't know how to love me. It wasn't going to work. If you don't do the work, don't fall in love. Do the work, and love will come to you. So what happened is I made the amends to people, and I'm still here, so they didn't kill me. But it was, the disease is between our ears. And I can remember in step 9, making direct amends to people, and there was people that had died that I couldn't make amends to. And the way that I do that part of the 9th step is I do something for somebody and I don't tell anybody. Because this is what happens. If you do something for somebody and you tell one person, you lose the joy. If you do something for somebody and don't tell a soul, you keep the joy forever. It's eternal. But I had to experience telling people first, and I said, man, I felt really good when I did that. Now I feel like shit. So the thing is if I can just do it and not tell anybody and just do it anonymously, I'm able to keep the joy. And then, going on to step 10, I never promptly admitted, look, I got caught red-handed and I told people I wasn't me. I don't know what and this is before video cameras. I don't know what you saw. That wasn't me. I didn't take that. Oh, yes, you did. No, I did not. So even clean, it was not easy to promptly admit that I was wrong, but recovery is about relationships. So it's not unmanly to admit you're wrong. I thought it was because I had this need to be right. And I wanted to have healthy relationships with people and I wanted to have this thing work. And so now it's just easier. If I can't sleep, I call whoever I got to call. And I admit when I'm wrong and do the best that I can with it. And then, moving on to step 11, we come to the second time that you see God as we understood him. And when that weekend that I was at Kent State for the East Coast Convention, I was looking for what a conscious contact was. And there was no definition of it. So I made up my own definition. And it's a conscious contact to me is an ever-present knowing that God's in my life. And it's an elusive thing, and it takes work to get to. And you can get there by prayer, and you can get there by meditation. I'm more one of those hands-on prayer type people than I am meditation because my life is very busy. And when I meditate, I got to be by myself. I got to be alone. and I need to work at that. But what happens is, at this point, there was a spiritual transformation that happened to Dutch. All I did was show up to meetings and take direction from my sponsor. I'm not smart enough to do anything else. Let me tell you, I've been to jail 17 times clean. And that's because I knew what I thought was right. At step 3, I only knew how to love things and use people. When I'd experienced step 11, I knew how to love people and use things. And that's a spiritual transformation that can happen to any addict that finds a new way to live. This is what they're talking about. These are things you can't see. Don't be looking for the things that you can see that's going to make this happen. It doesn't. Work on the things that makes it invisible, that you can't see, and it will happen. Look, it's a promise of freedom. Where I come from, a promise is word up, done, deal, going to happen no matter what. The promise of freedom that an addict, any addict, can stop using, find a new way to live. That's all of us, not some of us. So this is what happens. You come in, you got to admit that, look, I can't do this. I'm powerless. This fucks me up. I don't care how you say it. And I don't mean to cuss a lot, but look, I'm what I am, And then in step 2, man, I got some hope. I can do this thing. Step 3, yeah, I want to live the NA way. I want this thing. I do the inventory. I admit to God, to myself, and another human being. Whoa, defects, let's do it. Because I'm willing. I want this thing. Step 7, all right, I know I'm a liar. I know I fuck up. I didn't think it would happen, but it did. God, please, God, make a deal. Whatever I got to do. Get rid of this pain. Whoa, make the list. Oh, we got the list now. Make the amends. Promptly admit when you're wrong. Oh, shit. 11th step. I know how to love people now. What do I do? How do I love people? Man, here we go. Step 12. We carry the message. And let me tell you something. You don't have to be speaking at a meeting to carry a message. Somebody's always watching. I like this. That's new. Got a new thing. No, but what happens is just helping somebody across the street, opening a door, random acts of kindness. You don't know what they are? Ask somebody what a random act of kindness is. Because when we come in, we don't know. I didn't know what a random act of kindness was. My random act of kindness when I came in the first month was, well, I only steal half. That's a random act of kindness to me. I'll leave them to change. That was a random act of kindness, right? That's how we think. So what happens is now I'm able to love people this is what God wants for us. He wants us all to have the ability to love people where they're at, not where we want them to be. Narcotics Anonymous talks a lot about unconditional love, but let me tell you something. I can tell you, I've been on the front page of the rumor mill I don't know how many times because this is the most conditional fucking fellowship I've ever been around. If you don't do what people think you should do, they will talk about you, they will trash you, and this is all I got to say to that. Fuck them. There isn't one thing in any of the steps that says, let's take Dutch's inventory. If they're taking my inventory, they ain't working shit. Just remember that. If they're talking about you, they ain't got shit for the program. Nothing. And this is what happens once we get to step 12. It's easier to get there, but now you got to stay there. How do you stay there? We got to be vigilant. What the service teaches. The first 10 GSRs in the Philly area are still clean today. That's 37 years. Service speaks for itself. Are you a giver or are you a taker? Or are you just a shoplifter that wants to come in, steal your seat for a while and go on about your way? And usually if you like that, you just want to hook up with somebody, and after you hook up with them, we don't see you no more. That's experience. I ain't telling you a story. I'm telling you about the disease. Because I loved it. Look, I like the program more than I like anybody. But I'm going to tell you the experience because this thing does nothing want to kill you. But once you have the ability, once you go through this process and you have the ability to love people where they're at, not where you want them to be, you can sponsor better. You can be a better mate. You can be a better lover. You can be a better person, a better friend. But now, this is what happens. And these are the signs because it's happened to me 3 or 4 times. You stop being willing to help somebody. You're not worried about a conscious contact with God as you understand them. You're not taking your inventory, you're taking other people's inventories. You're not making amends to anybody. You think people need to make amends to you. You ain't making a list. You think you need to be on their list. You don't have the humility to know that you're still messing up and got some time and putting shade on it, because the more time you got, the better shade you can put on your shit so people can't peep your stuff. That's the way it is. Go to a meeting and see if anybody raised their hands with over 10 years clean and a burning desire. That don't happen. That's ego. It ain't Christmas every day. And the people that think that it's going to be Christmas every day, tell them the truth. Because people respect the truth. They'll respect the truth. So then you go back and you think other people are defective. You're not admitting to God, to yourself, or nobody. You're not even telling your sponsor what time it is now. You're back to taking everybody else's inventory. You're not taking your own. You're so confused you can't make a decision. You don't have the hope. So now you're starting to act out and you're really starting to cruise into these defects. And all that's left after you realize how unmanageable and a mess your life is with time, all that's left is not using. That's all that's left. So you can take that road. And like I tell the people that I sponsor, this is what can happen if you do this. And this is what can happen if you do that. Your choice. This isn't a Dutch keeps you clean program. This is a self-help program. What do you want? What do you think you deserve? Some people are happy with just staying clean. Some people want it all. You got to ask yourself, what do you want? I want it all. I'm not one of these people that, I'm glad the sun came up. Every day I live it like this is my last day on earth. I want the brass ring every day. I don't know what that's going to be when I wake up, but I'm excited when I get up. I don't want to be one of these people like, I got to do this. Do it, man. Lean into the pain. It moves. So that's what happened to me. That's my experience with the steps. And the steps is the program in Narcotics Anonymous. It's not us. We're the fellowship. Don't get that confused. I used to think that the fellowship was part of the program. And when I would feel betrayed by people in the fellowship, I would feel that the program betrayed me, but I wasn't right. This is a process. This is a journey. Welcome it. Embrace it. And you will live your life better than you could ever imagine. Now, I want to end it up with a story. I got divorced. I have 4 beautiful kids from my first wife. I met this other girl in the program. We got married, and she wanted to have children, and then she found out that she couldn't. Now, being a man, I'm thinking I have 4 kids with my other wife, and they can put a man on the moon. How do I support her knowing that all the medical issues and procedures that they have wouldn't allow her to have a child? And all I can say is this. If you do what God wants you to do, the blessings will come. And it comes in ways that you don't think it will. Now, I'm going to tell you one story real quick. May 1st, 1985. I cut my foot off with a chainsaw. The toes. And I know why it happened, because the day before I stole a carton of cigarettes with a pocket full of money. So I had 13 years clean. And I stole a carton of cigarettes with a pocket full of money because I wanted to see if I could get away with it. I'm the type of person, you tell me to sit, I'm going to stand just to see what you're going to do about it. Always been, always will. I fight it all the time. So that's spiritual reciprocity. I knew that it would come back some way, but I didn't know I'd cut my foot off the next day. I was hoping for a parking ticket, maybe. So what we give out, we get back. So Thanksgiving of 1993, this girl calls me up and she says, I want you to be the daddy of my baby. Wait a minute, this isn't time to fool around. We can't go there. I just been through in vitro fertilization for the second time. And my wife is still in her pajamas 3 months later because she got pregnant and lost it. And she said, no, I think of all the people that I know, you'd be the best daddy that I can think of. And I says, what are you talking about? And she says, I'm pregnant. My husband left me because she was 36, he was 40. She says, honey, what time you coming home? And he says, I don't think I'm coming home anymore. And he was with a 19-year-old. And he used. And He ended up going to jail, and she didn't want to raise a child by herself. So she wanted to do an open adoption. And I had never thought about an open adoption. And this was Thanksgiving time in 93. We were at the Connecticut Convention in 1994, New Year's Eve. The weekend of New Year's Eve, they always have it. And we get a phone call that she's going into labor. Now, he wasn't supposed to be born until February. So I said, nah, it's one of them false alarms. And if you remember 94, remember all the ice storms on 95? All the trees were silver for weeks. Well, it was in that kind of ice storm that we drove down. She drove. I just held on to the chicken bar and the seat, and because we was going through ice, and she says, I'm going to get my boy. And the next morning, January 4th, 1994, this child was born, and I was able to watch the most spiritual thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, picture this. Whitney Houston is singing. You know, they have the elevator music in hospitals. Whitney Houston was singing The Greatest Love of All. And I watched this woman hand this child over to my wife. And we adopted this little boy. So you can tell me that there isn't a God, but I see in his eyes every day that there's a loving God. Now, my parents never gave me the key to their house. This woman who didn't know me, but she knew of me, gave me the keys to her soul. The only thing I've ever done is just not want to use. I never asked for the blessings. And I get humbled all the time. I can remember when I had 2 years clean, I said, if it never gets better than this, I'm good to go. It keeps getting better. That boy just had a senior prom last night. And that boy, it's all about cars and girls now. And he's about this big. And he's going to go to culinary school because he knows what he wants. He wants to be a chef. And then after that, he's going to go to a college and get his degree for, hotel management. So he's doesn't use, doesn't smoke cigarettes, plays sports. All I did was go to meetings. There's no manual on raising kids. You people helped raise my boy. All my kids. And all my kids have turned out good. I didn't know how to look, all I knew my vocabulary when I came to NA was, yo, motherfucker, who's holding, where can I cop? Who's got the best stuff? What I got to do to get it? So the spiritual transformation that happened to me came from the love from you people. I didn't know anything about any of that. To me, love was sex. If you say you love me, we having sex. That, and when they first started hugging people in A, because for like the first 10 years, nobody hugged. And then when it started, it was like, whoa, now. Whoa, now. It says, ease up with this hugging stuff. But, you got to work into it, So my life has been blessed beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And all I did was come to meetings and do whatever I could to help people and help NA. And my most precious possession is my membership in Narcotics Anonymous. And I know I'm coming up on 40. I'll be in the 40 club if I make it. But if that happens, it happens. What happened to me this weekend was nice. I felt the love from Greenville, North Carolina. I felt the love from the committee. When it got all bent out of shape Friday, they handled their business. They took care of business. And where's Helen? I got to tip my hat to you. Helen calls me up and says, I got you, baby. I got you. And you know what? It was like, damn, I felt good. Because that's what we do. That's what we do. And you know what? There isn't any other place I'd rather be in the whole world. And I just hope that that's what you people want. I'm an addict named Dutch. Thanks for listening.